Hello, everybody. So, as you may have noticed, this week I did not start at 7 p.m. like I have been in the past. Instead, I had some stuff come up, and I needed to take care of that instead of coming online and doing a stream like I have been for the past several weeks. So, I guess the good news is that most people, the majority of people, are not watching these live. They're watching the YouTube links after the fact, sometimes a day or two later. So anybody who has been doing that, this is going to look exactly the same to you. Anybody who is watching them live, I'm sorry. If you want slightly more up-to-date information, you should follow me on Twitter. I believe there should be a link in the video description here with the Twitter account I've been using for this. I'm going to try and tweet out some information about what I'm planning on doing, as well as times and things like that. Today, I found out around lunchtime today that I had some stuff I had to take care of this evening. So I tweeted there that I'd be late, but was still planning on doing stuff. And then about half an hour ago, I said, you know what? I have time. We're going to do this still tonight. So, with that said, what are we going to talk about today? So, as you may or may not know, this past weekend, there were actually several CTFs. So if we go onto the CTF time, there was Volga CTF, which I think was probably the biggest of the CTFs that occurred this weekend. But in addition to Volga, there was also White Hat, one of the White Hat challenges. I believe that the White Hat challenges are there's a Vietnamese group that runs a whole bunch of these throughout the year. They have their own Grand Prix thing and a ton of competitions. They're all throughout the year. I don't actually know much about their system because it's a very kind of closed system. I think most of the people who really participate in their competitions basically only participate in their competitions and don't play in a lot of other things. I've played in a couple over the past couple of years. I think they've been doing them now for maybe a year or two. Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, so they've done several. I think they're up to contest 12 or something. Yeah, it looks like the first one on CTF time is from 2015. I think I've played in 2 or 3 of these now. They've been good. I haven't been unhappy with them. However, this competition was only, 12 hours, I think. And I'm not a huge fan of the really short competitions. They kind of favor really large teams because, so if I'm playing by myself and I have a little bit more of an opportunity to try multiple challenges if it's 48 hours. Like if it's a 48-hour competition, I can I can try, 5 to 10 challenges and find the one that fits my specific skills and actually work on it. Whereas if the competition's only, 8, 12 hours long, I can look at 2 or 3 if I'm going to give any of them any significant depth. And in addition to that, anything under 24 hours really favors whatever time zone the organizers are in. Because if I'm going to take it super seriously, I can time things so that I'm able to start there, wake up 45 minutes ahead of the competition, play for 24 hours, and go back to bed. But in case, that's just a personal preference. I know a lot of people prefer the shorter events. It's not as much of a time commitment. They get to show up, play, and see how they do. It's just not a thing that I personally like. I prefer the longer weekend-long events because it gives me more time to dig into multiple challenges. So anyway, that was White Hat. There was also Securinets. I know almost nothing about this. I know one of our team members took a brief look at it, and that's about all that I really know about it. I think this group has been running these for a while now. I don't remember if we played last year or not, but however, what I did take a look at was Volga CTF. So Volga has been being run by the same basic group, I think, for last year, and then they ran a teaser this year. last year I remember some of the challenges being pretty decent. One thing that is kind of amusing is they run Telegram for all of their support stuff. So most CTFs, they'll run an IRC channel. They'll, usually on Freenode, they pop up, here is, Volga CTF 27, like pound Volga CTF 2017. Volga, however, does it on Telegram. So I remember last year having the Telegram feed up and just streams and streams of stickers from people who wanted everybody to have all their stickers. So that's enough little trivia about it. So I only got a chance to really take a look at one challenge on here. The challenge I was looking at was the challenge was called Time Is. So the basics of the challenge were you talked to the service, you were able to send it a time zone, and it would respond back, or you'd send it a list, a comma delimited list, I think, of time zones, and it would tell you what the time zone is at each of those times. And then it also worked in a loop, so you'd be able to do it multiple times if you wanted to. So I, of course, again, if you're not familiar with it, I try and put all of my CTF write-ups or exploits or whatever I actually do during an event into my GitHub, just because I think it's easy to use, and I think it's also pretty easy to read here. Like, GitHub does a pretty good job of this. It gives me a place where they're all connected, and when I blow away a computer and rebuild everything, it only takes a git pull to get all of my old exploits, so that when, 6 months from now I go, I remember a challenge that was kind of like this. Let me see what I did there. I'll have them all available and be able to pull them up and see what it is. So, Time Is. Here's the exploit that I wrote for it. It's probably a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. And there's two pieces to this. Well, there's actually three pieces to this. So the first piece is that their challenges had a proof of work involved. So what exactly is a proof of work? So proof of work is this thing right here in the middle. The way that I solved it, it's not the only way to solve it, but that's the way that I solved it, was to basically just brute force it. And unfortunately, I don't have the text from this. You just have what I parsed out of here. And if I remember correctly, well, actually, let's take a look here. Did they happen to leave it up? Maybe we're lucky and the servers are still up. And yeah, so this is what you got when you connected to it. Solve a puzzle, find an X such that 26 last bits of SHA-1 X are set, len of X is 29, and the first 24 bytes are this random string. So that's the puzzle they gave you. And this is something that comes up, I wouldn't say frequently, but maybe 5 to 10% of events have at least one challenge that implements something like this. The basic idea is that so this is the same basic idea for a proof of work challenge as Bitcoin uses, right? So the way the Bitcoin proof of work works is they want a SHA-1, I believe it's a SHA-1, that has the last some number of bits 0. And if you want to, you can read through, I just Googled it. But basically, it's the first some number. So they want the first some number of bits to be 0 such that, it proves something. Looks like Bitcoin is using SHA-256 because I guess they decided SHA-1 was not good. I'm not surprised by that, especially given the fairly recent stuff with SHA-1 being broken with the shattered stuff. But I always forget because I believe Bitcoin does use SHA-1 someplace internally and SHA-256 other places. It's been a while since I've looked into the actual implementation. But the short version is the way they do their proof of work for mining is you need to make a block have a hash such that some number of bits match a specific thing. And the idea is that the hash function should be outputting something that is indistinguishable from random numbers. So for me to get a hash that meets whatever this constraint is, I basically have to hash that number of things randomly. That may be a little bit confusing, but I think the page here does a pretty decent job of explaining it. So in this case, they want the first 4 hex bytes to be 0000, or the first 16 bits to be 0. Basically, they take this, they have some sort of a nonce. Oh, no, they have the string, and then they add a nonce. Sorry, again, this is a theme that you will probably notice if you keep watching this. I'm not great at crypto, so I mix up terms frequently. The nonce is the thing they add at the end to make it different each time. But they have this string here, which is exactly like the puzzle gives us. They have a string they're going to give us, and then we need to append some number of bytes to this, such that the last 26 bits are set. So instead of the first some number of bits being 0, we want the last bits to be 1. And we get to mess with 5 bytes worth, because they give us 24 bytes. We then get to add 5 more bytes, so that it's 29 bytes. Seems straightforward, right? So the reason we're talking about this is because one of the team members that I played with actually asked me about this, because the stuff that he wrote and the stuff that I wrote the first time too just didn't work. So you may be asking yourself, why is that? Because if you take a look at what I'm doing here, it's relatively straightforward. I have the start, which I've parsed out of the puzzle. In this case, I found the start of that quote, and then I take to the end of that quote and basically I have start, I then append a random string. I'm using random S out of Pwn Tools for this. Basically, that's how they, random S will give you a string of whatever length you give it with whatever alphabet you give it. The second argument is an alphabet, and if you don't give it an alphabet, it defaults to lowercase letters, I believe. In this case, I'm giving it letters just because I want it to be a bigger alphabet. I very, very rarely actually specify this argument unless I have a very good reason for it. And I'll get into this. For this one, I did. After I've generated my attempt, the buff, I just use hashlib, I hash it, I get the hex digest. I then do, this is awful code. I'm positive there was a much more efficient way to do this, but I went through several iterations. This is the one that I knew just had to work. So what I'm doing here is I convert the hash into an integer value. I only care about the last some number of bytes because realistically, the rest of it doesn't really matter for me. Then I do call bin of that value, and I want to make sure that the last 26 bits of bin are ones. Again, horribly inefficient. I would like to point out, I wrote this while I was trying to make something work, and I couldn't figure out why my code wasn't working. So I figure, oh, the way that I'm counting bits must be wrong. I must be doing something wrong here. I must be doing something wrong here. Turns out, none of those things are right. What I was doing wrong was the number of combinations. So, if we remember here, they want the last 26 bits to be 0. So, what exactly is, what does that mean? The last 26 bits are 1. I'm sorry, if the last 26 bits were 1, not 0, it means that we have basically a 1 in 67 million chance of getting a hash that matches that. So if we give it some random data, we have a 1 in 67 million chance of it having those bits set the way that they want it to be. Okay, that doesn't sound bad. So basically, on average, if I make 67 million attempts at this hash, I should get one that fits it, and I can submit it, and I can go on my way. Awesome. The problem is that the other constraint there, that it has to have a length of 29 bytes. Why is that a problem? So what my teammate was doing was they were supplying hex bytes. So there are 16 characters in their library. And what that means is that, in their alphabet. if there are 16 possible combinations and there are 5 spots, total number of combinations is only a little over 1 million, which means most of the time, so 98, 99% of the time, it just won't work. It'll completely fail because none of the combinations that make up those last 5 bytes, because of the alphabet you chose, can work. So what I ended up doing, so just for example, if you had the full byte, you have plenty of space, but I think most of us assumed, oh, it's, they gave us a string like that, I should be sending it ASCII characters, I should be sending it that. If I just did lowercase letters, so the first time I tried it, I was just using randomS with no argument, or with just the length argument, and that's only giving me 11 million, 12 million combinations. So with randomS, 20% of the time it works. The other 80% of the time, I just can't pass their hash. Sorry, I did not mean to do that. That was entirely unintentional rhyming there. So what I ended up changing to was I'm using letters, which is the slightly more common. So at this point, I should get it most of the time. I don't necessarily. And if you take a look at what the code's actually doing, I also have in here, if I go over the number of possible combinations, just kill the socket and restart it. I figure this right here will just work. So that's a proof of work. These get implemented in CTF somewhat regularly. It's a good idea to have a good, if you were playing CTF, it's probably a good idea to have these in your back pocket and have an idea of how these work, because they're going to come up. They're usually implemented for challenges that, for whatever reason, are very resource intensive. So I've seen them on challenges that spin up a VM specifically for you, or are like a custom architecture that is emulated and not super efficiently emulated. Just because they might only be able to have 10 instances of that running at a time. So for them to do that, they need something like this in place in front of it to keep somebody from just slamming it with constant data and making it unusable for everybody. I've even seen cases where they have some physical device you're connecting to, and they're using a proof of work gate like this to verify that it's actually being used fairly and not just being brute forced. So that's the first part of this. I thought it'd be a good idea to just talk about these for a second, because it's something that a lot of people aren't really accustomed to. It's something that comes up in CTF and comes up in cryptocurrency, and outside of that, I don't know if it comes up at all. So there you go, guys. This is what a proof of work looks like. Here's how you do it. Here are some of the pitfalls. Make sure that the number of combinations you have is greater than the number, the probability that you will get the right hash. If not, restart and try again, because why not? Other than that, there's a couple other things about this binary that's interesting. So when I took a look at this challenge, this is the time is challenge. The binary they give you does not have that proof of work. My guess is that they're using something like xinetd to run this, but they're not directly running the challenge from xinetd. They've got some Python script which does the proof of work, and if you finish the proof of work, it then does a popen or some method to call the actual binary. Otherwise, they just exit and fail. I don't know for sure that that's how they do it, but that's how I would do it if I was implementing it. So, seems like a safe assumption. Anyway, the way this ends up working is after I've succeeded my check here, that's right here, there's an actual binary. So, there's a few things that are important about this binary. The first thing I noticed when I popped this thing open and I started poking at it was, well, the first thing I noticed is that this was a fairly large function and that there seemed to be a ton of different things going on here. So let's actually pull that up real quick. So if I pull up my binary ninja, oh, nope, this is easiest printf, which was from OCTF. I want Volga's CTF. Time is. So I've actually taken a look at it, like it's a, reasonably large function here. The important things about what they're doing is they take some data, they actually use the getDelim function, which is a function that I wasn't actually familiar with prior to this. It's actually a pretty interesting function. I'm really surprised I don't see it more often. You give it a pointer that you want to have data filled into. You give it a size of that pointer if it's currently a non-null value. You give it a delimiter, and you give it a file handle. And basically, it's just going to read into, like, it will read up to that delimiter into the pointer you give it. And there's some handling such that if line pointer is null and n is set to 0, then it will allocate a buffer for you. Otherwise, it assumes that this buffer is a malloc buffer and it will reallocate. Okay. Basically, it handles the entire thing about doing like a get line or something like that. In fact, they even have get line just for that. But it's something that I haven't really seen before in a CTF challenge, and I think it's actually kind of cool. Anyway, so they do that. They're going to read in some data to us. They've said enter the time zone separated by white space. Then they do a whole bunch of stuff here. This right here is the quit handler. If you send it a Q as the only thing on the line, it will quit. Otherwise, it's going to come down here. It does stuff. 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 It does a lot of stuff. And it calls printf. And if you take a look at this, well, what exactly is this format specifier it's giving us? Oops. Turns out, come on. This is my computer being unhappy right now. Like I mentioned last time, I need to kill this. I've got some process here that's burning up CPU time, and I'm not sure if it's in the VM or outside of VM. I just need to blow everything away and start over, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Now that I think about it, it might actually also have to do with the streaming stuff. I know that some of the streaming stuff can be fairly resource intensive. I don't think what I'm doing is, but I don't know. I need to just blow everything away and start over. But anyway, so there we go. Where exactly is this showing up? And the answer is that's actually the output from. Unfortunately, this doesn't show up very well here, but trust me when I say this. This is actually the output from getDelim. So when I gave it one of these, this is actually in here where they're doing that processing. When I give it a time zone, it's eventually going to come down here and it's going to call printf with it. So if I go into CTF events Volga and I actually run time is, and I do %x, oh, how about %x, %x. Yep, that looks like a pretty standard format string vulnerability. We just did one of these last week for easiest printf in 0CTF. This seems like a great time to crack out that format, the auto-pwn format string stuff out of pwn tools, right? Nope. So what just happened here? What just happened here is that this binary has some protections in place. So there's the standard protections that come up pretty often. if you're not using checksec, you really should be. It's a bash script. Just Google checksec. Basically, it's a fairly simple script which goes through and says, oh, is this binary protected? If it is, what protections are in place? And to give you an example of how this is different, what was this actually called? So, what's the difference here? First off, we see that rel row is different here. This is only partial rel row as opposed to full rel row. There's a stack canary in both of them. There's NX in both of them. There's no pi in either one. R path is the same. Run path is the same. Fortify is the same. Fortified is different. And fortifiable is different. So what's happening here is there's a flag you can pass to GCC, which is fortify source. Oh, I closed that window already. Let's see if Google gives me a good example here. Does Stack Exchange tell me? So, unfortunately, I don't have a good example right here of what exactly they're doing, but fortify source, if you pass it as a flag and there's some sort of an optimization, then it's going to do some checking for you. I believe that fortify source is set to 2 here. However, given that this says fortified 1, maybe it's only fortify 1. I don't actually know the full specifics of how this is implemented. Like, it's one of those GCC things that basically all that I care about is kind of screws me and makes me feel bad. I can't use %n because if %n, if the format specifier is a %n and it's in a writable segment, printf just fails here. Like, I get that error message up there, so I go run this, and I do my %n, and I'm just gonna have a bad day. Like, it just straight up aborts because it saw that %n was in a segment it could write to, fails out altogether. So the standard attack for a format specifier is you're going to go and call, like, you're gonna use %n to write into some memory address. Check out last week's video on OCTF and easiest printf for some of the many, many things you can do to get exploitation there. However, when we fortified the way that we fortified here, it just fails out altogether. That's not the only thing that it does. The other thing that comes up here is I want the 7th argument. And it prevents that too. The explanation that I saw, like, I spent a little bit of time looking into this one, is for if you use this argument, if you this is the indexed, it's the printf indexed option where I'm saying %, and I want the 7th argument to printf, or the 7th, yeah, I want the 7th argument to printf. I want the pointer value there. The logic that I saw was that there is no guarantee that you will decode all pointers, so they just don't allow it at all if you have this fortified source on. The end result is that basically there's a printf, I control the printf, but I'm going to have a bad day. So, look, what else is going on in this binary? Well, if we go back over to the exploit that I have here, the answer is, yeah, there was a format string specifier. There was also a super simple buffer overflow. It just took bytes from you and would, like, just read them onto the stack for you. Because that's what they use getDelim to give me a buffer for a format specifier, and then they would just copy that into a stack buffer for the actual, time zone that they're trying to convert from. So what I have here, is I wrote a little function here to use the format specifier to leak out a address wherever I want. So this is relatively simple. I actually just kind of did this by hand. So I'm going to do %C. So that's going to, each time I have a %C in my format specifier, it's going to pop one value off the list of arguments. It doesn't actually pop it off for most of these because they're passed in arguments. But it's going to do 15 of them, and then it's going to do a %S. And basically here, this was a little bit of trial and error, and such that the %S will return the value at adder right there, which is the argument to my leak function. So again, relatively straightforward. I'm just going to do this. I receive until I get the delimiter that I put in there. The buff I'll read in. You'll notice that I'm cutting some bytes off and mixing them around here. That's just because I know what the pointers I'm looking for look like. So I'm doing this to make sure that I get what I actually expect to get. Anyway, what this does is it lets me read in an arbitrary address. I then read these two values out of the GOT. I want to find out what their LibC is. And when I do that, you'll see. Oh, this is not going to work. I'm just going to run this locally. I'm not going to run this local. I'm going to run this locally, but I'm going to then comment out. Oh, I can't type apparently. I need to comment out that proof of work stuff because I don't have that working locally. And so what I did here was I printed out this. And what I'm printing this out for is I'm going to take this and I'm going to use LibC database. And this LibC database, so there's two different ways that I use to find what libc. So Volga CTF did not give you the libc for the binaries. At least this challenge did not, and I didn't really look at any other ones. So the two ways that I've done in the past finding out, okay, well, I need libc, or I don't need it, but it's the easiest way to do exploitation is if I have it. So one way to do it is libcdb.com. I've had some not great results using this. Basically, a number of times when I've done this, it works really well if it's a 32-bit libc. A 64-bit libc, not so great. So what I use is the LibC DB by Nicholas B. If you're not familiar with him, he's a relatively active CTF player. I don't remember what group he plays with. Oh, Kit CTF or Eat, Sleep, Pwn, Repeat. I suspect that the motivation for LibC database was to play CTF. But it's pretty simple. Basically, just come in here, clone this. You need to do this. It takes a while to run this the first time. It's actually going out and it's collecting, I believe, all of the Ubuntu ones that it can find. Like, it goes out, it finds a ton of libcs that might be the default on whatever the system is, downloads them, and then I'm going to call find with some offsets for it. Pretty straightforward. Basically what I'm able to do here is I'm able to do find I have get delim, a pointer, set vbuff, and another pointer. So I just pass that in like that, and it tells me, oh, I've seen a libc that matches that. Here you go. Basically, the archive glibc, whatever that is the one that lines up with the libc that I'm using. Turns out it's actually the same one that they were using. So that's a little curious because I don't think I've ever seen a CTF that's running with the same libc that I am. But what do I know? Anyway, so I got their libc, and if we go back to the exploit here, I pop it in here, I set the address, then here I'm using a OneShot Gadget. You may remember last time I talked a little bit. CD dot dot. I talked a little bit about this. One gadget. This was a. I posted it in the video last time. It's David. There we go. Of course, that didn't work. David 942J. And I just did exactly what he says to do here. Installed this Ruby script. And basically what this does is I give it a file. I give it a libc. And it spits out a set of arguments. So what does it actually look like? So I've got their libc here. I'm going to do one gadget, libc.so. Blip. Here are a list of one-shot gadgets that should work. And if you notice, this one lines up with the offset into libc that I used in my exploit. This is super dirty. Usually I do something a little bit nicer than this, but like originally I was going to try and do system bin sh as a ROP chain. I got tired and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to throw this and get this over with. So I throw this one-shot gadget. I'm basically just setting up a buffer overflow. I put in the cookie here because I also leaked out the cookie. Up here, the first thing I do is I leak that out. I'm using the exact same technique that I use to print out these pointers. I'm just using the same thing I found basically through... so basically what I did here was I printed out a whole bunch of pointers off the stack. Then, or I printed out a whole bunch of them and I searched for the return address from main. And I know that if I walk backward a couple pointers from that, I'm going to see what the cookie is. And the way that I verified all this worked is I just tried it. I wrote this part of the script, I ran it in GDB, I broke right before the check, and I validated the value that's being printed out here is the same thing it was checking against. Like, it's quick, it's dirty, it just works. Normally, I would use an indexed value into printf because I just had to eat through so many arguments here. I had to eat through the first 10 to get onto the stack, into that big buffer. Then I had to eat through 800 hex bytes worth. And then another pointer to eat off some, I believe, alignment there. And then I finally get the stack cookie. Or I could have just done this in a single shot if I could use an indexed argument number. But I can't, so no point in really complaining about it, right? Anyway, so I got the cookie here. I did a little bit of logic to pull it out. So again, up over here, I'm going to run that buffer overflow through here. I'm going to throw in my cookie. This is just some number of bytes to actually offset up to the first address. And what I'm actually doing here is a little tricky. So the problem is that I can send this gadget and it works fine. However, when I try and send this cookie, because of how it's doing get to lim, I actually fail when I send it the null byte, I believe. What I'm able to do though is I just do it multiple times. I've got this buffer overflow in a loop. Like I do it once, I write out my ROP gadget, I do it again to reset the cookie, and we all go on our way and I get to have a shell. So that's it. This week is a little bit shorter than it's been. It's been getting progressively shorter, but this week is shorter because I started so late. I don't want to go super late into the night. So I'm probably just going to end it here. There's a couple things, like if you joined late, there's a couple things I went through here. I went through really briefly the CTFs that went over this weekend. I talked a little bit about the proof of work that some challenges have in order to gate access to a challenge. And then I also talked a little bit about some of the protections in place, in particular about Fortify Source. I didn't really go really in depth here about what Fortify Source does, because especially for simpler CTF challenges, it doesn't actually matter that much. The only thing that matters here is that if you have Fortify Source on, it stops a lot of attacks. In this case, it completely stops the ability for me to do anything with a format string pacifier. I don't actually know if that's true. The internet tells me it's true, and if it isn't true, I expect that to be a very hard challenge. Like, I'm finding what amounts to O'Day in a protection for GCC. I hope I'm getting a lot of points if I'm going to use that. But as far as I'm concerned, especially for a, low to midpoint value challenge, if I saw that I sent a %n and it told me I can't use %n, I probably just can't use %n, especially when it's a standard protection that GCC gives you. I'm not going to dig into it that much. The same with any of these other things that it protects from. So from this Stack Overflow thing, it tells me that it also protects a whole bunch of things where it does some checks. This doesn't actually list them out. There's an Ubuntu page in here. Here. This actually tells you some of the things that it checks for and some of the messages you get. Come on. Fortify Source equals 2. There's this number of things that it does. Like, the big ones here are the writable segment thing. There's this buffer overflow thing. Like, if I see these, I'm going to take a very brief look to see if they're doing something incredibly dumb someplace with it. Otherwise, I'm kind of just going to assume that these protections just work. So, like I said, that's about all that I have this week. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. The same methods of messaging me are open as they have been. Follow me on Twitter. Feel free to message me, tweet at me. I believe you can DM me. Leave comments on the video here. Send me a message on IRC or Slack or whatever your favorite method of communication is. Feel free to get a hold of me if you have any questions, comments, ideas of what you'd like to see next week. So this weekend, I'm unfortunately not going to be playing CTF, so I won't be taking part in New Week to Hack or April Fools, or the teaser stuff for Confidence. Those are the events that are going on this weekend. There's also Pico CTF kicks off, so none of those am I going to be participating in. So next Monday, I'm not entirely sure what I'll be talking about. I'll have a little bit of time on Sunday, I believe, to take a look at some challenges, but it'll be after all of these wrap up. So if there's anything particularly interesting that somebody has to comment, I might take a look at those. I might go back and take a look at some older stuff. I just talk about something completely random. We'll see what happens next week. But the plan is next week should be at 7 p.m. Eastern. Like it has been, as opposed to 8:45 when I finally got home and got ready to stream. I do recommend for people take a crack at some of these. I don't know anything at all about the April Fool stuff. New Week to Hack has been running forever. I think these guys have been doing it for 8 years, something like that. It's been going on a long time. So according to this, it's a long time. The basic version, it's been going on a long time. They'll probably have a number of challenges. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag as to how high quality the event is, but last year it went relatively well. As far as their quals went, if we take a look here, we can see, what did people think? Well, last year was good, average, some guessing stuff. Ginvale, who personally I think has very good opinions on most of this stuff, thought it was pretty good, but some point values were messed up. It looks like the low stuff is because individual challenges had problems with individual challenges, but it should be interesting to at least take a crack at it. There's also several other events if that is not your cup of tea. Like I said, there is the April Fool's going on, as well as the teaser for Confidence. Oh, this is something being run by Dragon Sector. Forget what I just said. If you're going to be playing CTF this weekend, this is probably the one that I would take part in. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Dragon Sector people. Like, they're a very good CTF team. Every event that I'm aware of that they've put together challenges for has always been quite good. I would expect this to be very good too. Like, I've played in the teaser in the past, and I seem to remember it being pretty good. So, short version, take a crack at this if you have some time. Otherwise, the Pico CTF is something that I really recommend taking a try at, especially if you're somebody who is just getting started. And I say that I hopefully am not lying and that people can actually register for this. Because everything I've heard is that it is extremely good, and especially for learning how to do things. Yeah, it looks like you can just register for it. So if you're trying to learn stuff, Pico CTF, everyone that I've talked to, it's mostly been the people who organize it. They all say it's great. So would recommend this or the Confidence teaser if you're looking for some CTF action this weekend. So thanks everybody for checking out this week. Like I said earlier, if you have anything, questions, comments, whatever it is, let me know. Thanks everybody. Bye.